exponential increase in global temperature since industrialization began. This next image shows that fresh water would generally decrease in areas such as around the Mediterranean, which includes Southern Europe and Northern Africa, Central America, South America and Southern Africa, and Southern Australia. This next image shows a general decrease in agricultural yields in much of Africa, South America, Australia, some of the Pacific, Asia Pacific, South Asia, and southern United States and Central America. And this is of particular concern considering that global population is conversely projected to increase. This image shows the decrease in ice cover in the Arctic, and this is of particular importance because ice produces the albedo effect, which reflects radiation that controls temperature on Earth, but if it's decreasing, that effect has a positive feedback, which would only serve to continue to increase global temperature. And so that brings us to the question of what is loss and damage. So if anyone is familiar with the term and wants to produce an answer in the chat, you're welcome to do so.
Do you guys want to try typing in the chat a guess at what loss and damage is? Cool. Maybe I shall pass this on to the next slide with our definition.
Yes, so the working definition of loss and damage are the costs that remain from climate change that are not avoided through mitigation and adaptation. Mitigation is that first step where we try to avoid climate change by reducing emissions through areas such as renewable energy or agriculture. And the second cost of adaptation, which are the costs where climate change cannot be avoided by mitigation, and therefore we have to have infrastructural adjustments to adapt to climate change. Loss and damage being that third cost when climate change cannot be fared through mitigation or adaptation. Loss refers to those irreplaceable effects to health, lives, livelihoods. And so some of that was mentioned in the chat. There's also damage, which are replaceable to physical infrastructure or property. And loss and damage is further defined according to economic losses. So that refers to the damage to replaceable stuff like infrastructure and property, while non-economic tends to be the irreplaceable loss to life and health and loss of culture from migration So there are two categories of hazards that are usually classified that results in loss and damage. One is the immediate extreme events, such as flooding, and second would be the slow onset events, such as desertification. And so we have some illustrations of some immediate events which have occurred this year, though we're only 3 months into the year. And so the first one shows Cyclone Ilwaz, which hit Mozambique in Southern Africa in January. The second image shows the wildfires in the western United States. And the third shows the glacier that burst in northern India in February. Some slow onset events are desertification. This image is from Egypt in northern Africa. The second illustrates coral reef loss due to ocean acidification. And what happens is that as the pH of the ocean increases, owing to increased carbon dioxide uptake, the algae that cohabitate with the corals are ejected, and it results in coral bleaching. And finally, a sea level rise, which results from the melting glaciers. And like the bleaching of coral reefs is particularly detrimental to island states that depend on coral reefs for protection from events such as sea level rise. So these images illustrate the two cyclones that hit Mozambique consecutively in 2019. 2 million people were impacted and more than 600 people died while more than 1,600 were injured. About 100,000 people were internally displaced. Half of them were children, and half of the displaced people are still living in emergency shelter as of the beginning of this year. There was also a reported cholera outbreak and an urgent need for shelter, food, and healthcare. And of course, this occurred pre-pandemic, and Adriana and many of us would be familiar with Hurricane Eta and Iota that hit Honduras last year during the pandemic that had similar impacts, but of course, mounting on the circumstances of the pandemic. And so more climate disasters that happened last year as well occurred in Australia and the Philippines. And it was noted that 2020 came close to 2016 as one of the hottest years recorded. And we know that the Atlantic hurricane season was one of the most active on record. And that was the reason why we had hurricanes named after the Greek alphabet, because the Latin alphabet was exhausted. So next we're gonna look at some effects of loss and damage in politics, finance, and climate justice, and I'll hand over to Sadie.
Great. Hi, everyone. I am now going to talk a little bit about the politics, finance, and climate justice aspects of loss and damage. So first, just giving some background on how loss and damage is dealt with on the ground. So you can see from this photo, these are people from the Red Cross and Red Crescent Society, so it's a humanitarian agency. And the reality is that a lot of loss and damage right now is dealt with by humanitarian agencies like the Red Cross. So they'll get notification of a disaster, and then they'll be preparing their operations, and then they'll come and respond to disasters with food, with health aid, with shelter support. And it's often a really complex mission because they're trying to reach people in difficult circumstances, like trying to bring supplies in while there's flooding, while there's power outages, and often they're quite under-resourced. And there are some countries which also have government departments that are doing emergency response, but similarly they tend to be kind of under-resourced and not able to reach all the people who are suffering. And similarly, on the ground, there is some support from the climate adaptation side of things that goes toward loss and damage. For example, some adaptation projects have early warning systems built in, which are kind of like emergency alert systems that would send you a text or get on the radio and tell people like, okay, now it's time to evacuate, or now it's time to harvest your crops a week early because there's a disaster coming. These kinds of things are built into adaptation programs and in a growing way, but still not really to the extent that addresses the scale of the need of the problem. And so yeah, I think there's a lot to be done in terms of specifically improving the disaster response to loss and damage. But I think it's notable that loss and damage isn't really currently dealt with on the ground using kind of the tools or mechanisms from the United Nations climate framework. So that's one reason that I call loss and damage the biggest climate justice issue you've never heard of, because on the left here, you can kind of see a photo of the negotiators making decisions about climate policy. And on the right, you can see some people who've been affected by disasters. And, most of the time, the people who are most affected by disasters don't have a say in decision making around how disasters are dealt with and how loss and damage is dealt with. And so yeah, that inequality is something that I want to highlight louder. And yeah, so and I also wanted to bring in the context of inequality and colonialism as like the foundation of why this is a climate justice issue. So this is a GIF or GIF, if you will, on which shows kind of colonialism through the years, and particularly you could see a lot of European colonies through the years. Now, our early 1900s, you see lots of the English and the French colonies around the world, and the legacy of colonialism is inequality, is exploitation of labor and resources, and that exploitation was used to enrich the colonial nations, and those nations remain wealthy at the expense of poorer countries because of colonialism. And so that's the backdrop of why climate injustice exists. Especially because these colonial nations are also the ones that have the highest levels of emissions, and while the people who are dealing with loss and damage for the most part and are most severely impacted are people who have very little emissions. And so there's also that aspect of pollution inequality. And the third aspect is the decision-making inequality being that most of these people, as I mentioned in the previous slide, won't have a say at the global decision-making table. And the climate policy, even though every country is able to attend the UN climate negotiations, it really is the wealthy nations that have the power, because they're the ones who are emitting the most, and they're also the ones who have the money to deal with climate change, because they exploited all of these other nations. So, with my rambling discussion on that, I'll start going into how loss and damage is dealt with within the UN climate negotiations. So loss and damage is governed by the Warsaw International Mechanism on Loss and Damage, called the WIM. It was established in 2013, and its mandate is to address loss and damage associated with the impacts of climate change. And its kind of three functions are to enhance knowledge and understanding of loss and damage, strengthen dialogue and coordination between countries and institutions, and enhance action and support, which includes finance, technology, and capacity building to help developing nations address loss and damage. And loss and damage is also part of the Paris Agreement, the International Climate Treaty. And it has its own article, Article 8, which states that countries should enhance understanding, action, and support on loss and damage. And just to make it clear, there's an article on mitigation and one on adaptation, and so loss and damage is that third pillar. And here is an interesting artifact. The first recorded mention of loss and damage in a UN climate change document submitted in 1991. So it has been 30 years and still no real action has been taken on loss and damage, though there has been a lot of discussion. But you can see here, it says that the burden of loss and damage suffered by the small island and low-lying developing countries as a result of sea level rise should be distributed in an equitable manner amongst the industrialized developed countries. So it really was the small island developing states. Those of you from those states understand how vulnerable they are to the impacts of climate change, and so they were calling for that, and they knew it was happening 30 years ago. And in terms of loss and damage finance, what is available? And what is the cost? The estimated cost of loss and damage in 2020 was between 100 billion and 400 billion US dollars. By 2030, it's estimated that loss and damage will cost 300 to 600 billion dollars per year. And by 2050, the estimated cost is $1 to $2 trillion per year. And of course, these numbers will be highly dependent on how effective we are at reducing emissions and how effective we are at adapting and preventing loss and damage. But considering that we've already experienced 1.2 degrees of warming, I'm not that optimistic that we're going to avoid loss and damage at this scale, and so we need to be looking at addressing it. And in terms of the finance that is available for loss and damage right now, there are, in terms of designated loss and damage funds from the International Climate Framework, there are $0. And there's no loss and damage finance framework, despite the fact that there is a framework to deal with mitigation and adaptation. So, some of the money from adaptation, humanitarian aid and development is going to, automatically be going to loss and damage. But I would not estimate that those numbers are very big, especially considering that it's likely that countries aren't meeting the $100 billion annual flow of climate finance that they promised to channel from developed countries to developing countries by last year. And so the reality is that the majority of the costs of loss and damage are borne by the people who are impacted by it, and secondarily by the governments who are impacted by it. There are some examples of countries losing more than 100% of their GDP, like they're becoming indebted because of disasters. And then also this in a position where many countries, developing nations, are already in major debt because of some international institutions like the International Monetary Fund and the governments in developed countries that control the politics there. So here's a list of asks from developing countries on loss and damage, which we've seen in the negotiations back in 2019 when we were able to have negotiations in person. So finance to address loss and damage is the main ask, and it aligns with our main ask. They have asked for the Warsaw International Mechanism to work with the UN Climate Change Standing Committee on Finance, which is a finance body, to help them come up with that finance. They've asked the WIM to work with the Green Climate Fund, which is a major fund providing channeling funds from developed countries to developing countries, and to establish an expert group on action and support, which is a special group of people which will focus on understanding how that finance, technology, and capacity building can come through the UN system. And the final thing is which was actually established in 2019 is the Santiago Network on loss and damage, which will be kind of a network of technical partners. So it hasn't actually been established yet. It'll be established this year, but I kind of envision it being like a network of different humanitarian partners, governments, NGOs, all coming together to say, okay, what are we doing to address loss and damage right now? What do we need to address loss and damage? And like, how do we assess our need, and bringing that together to also ask for the finance that they need in their specific countries, depending on how loss and damage is affecting them. And in terms of developed country positions on loss and damage, there are a spectrum of views, kind of all the way from people who see it as an existential threat to people who view it as no different than adaptation, and say that loss and damage doesn't exist. I would say most developed countries do not take loss and damage as seriously as they should, considering the risk, and they have been blocking on providing new and additional finance for loss and damage. And the reason is likely because they don't want to be held liable for the amount of money that loss and damage is going to cost, and because it's expensive, and they would rather take stock of the existing development and climate finance that they're already giving and see how it can be repurposed for loss and damage. But I see that as kind of a delaying mechanism. Anyway, so yeah, that's the general overview of the finance and politics of loss and damage. And I'm going to pass it on to Ava. Hopefully, hopefully your connection's okay. I saw you coming back in. And she's going to talk about what is already being done and a vision for the future on loss and damage.
Thank you, Sadie. So I'm going to jump right in and talk about what has been done and what we can do and what we hope to see in the future. So as mentioned earlier, loss and damage isn't a new topic or issue since it's been there since 1991, but there is still a long way to go in achieving climate justice. So far, there was an establishment of the Warsaw International Mechanism, which has a mandate to address the loss and damage caused by climate change by providing capacity building, enhancing knowledge and understanding, and providing support. So its implementation is guided by the executive committee. The WIM it was a great initiative, but there is a gap, which is in the implementation on the ground for people affected by those disasters. And this is mainly due to the lack of finance. This led to the establishment of the Santiago Network. The purpose of the Santiago Network is to create a window aiming to support vulnerable countries to respond to the climate crisis. So another point on what's being done is that vulnerable countries are coming together to raise their voice on the fact that addressing loss and damage should be a priority, and it's an issue completely apart from mitigation and adaptations. So, because in some negotiation rooms, they may tend to mention finance for adaptation. It's a similar way for loss and damage. Next slide. So what we hope to see at COP26 to be the inclusion of loss and damage in the agenda, but also, as mentioned in one of the articles written by Dr. Salim, the first thing will be to develop a detailed implementation structure for the Santiago network. Right now, there's the UNFCCC Secretariat who has set up the website, but there could be a danger to just be a website if there's no detailed structure. So one of the best solutions is by making sure the Santiago network achieves its purpose, will be to develop the same model onto which the CTCN work. And by having a focal point in every, the CTCN have a focal point in every developing country through which request for assistance is made, then the CTCN responds to. So this work frame has been working well and can be duplicated for the Santiago network. That could be one of the solutions. And we also hope to see a new window of finance specific for loss and damage. Next slide. Simply put, our vision for the future is honoring the right for a future for the next generation. A world where loss and damage is fully addressed based on the need of people. And we could reach this by avoiding the extent of loss and damage impact through effective adaptation and mitigation actions, by also increasing the accountability of big polluters and providing reparation for those affected by climate change. Next. So what we are doing at LDYC could be summarized in 3 parts. There is storytelling. We're gathering different stories from different parts of the world on the impact of loss and damage through blogs, video, and art. We're also advocating for the government to take action in addressing loss and damage on the national and the international level. An example could be the open letter written to the US government. We're also building the capacity of youth to understand the connection between climate change and its impact, and becoming the experts on loss and damage, to be the negotiators, future negotiators, and everything. And next. So our demands are pretty simple but important. So we demand a prioritizing action, to prioritize action on loss and damage. To government to prioritize action on loss and damage, and to establish a new window of finance for loss and damage for developed countries to make commitment and replenishment of the mentioned loss and damage finance window, and to commit to making loss and damage decision making inclusive by including youth from the LDYC and other oppressed people in policy making. Yeah, next. So what can you do, or what can I do? So as the issue is of utmost importance, we all need to work on this. So you can work with us by monitoring and communicating loss and damage issues in your community. It could be by storytelling or any other way, trainings, and working with peers and community leaders to increase loss and damage knowledge, to join local initiative aiming to respond to climate issues, and to pressure the politicians to recognize that loss and damage is way beyond the political issues. And lastly, to join our Global Day of Action. Speaking of the Global Day of Action, to be on 8th of April. As I said, there is an open letter written to the US government. I think we shared the link in the chat. You you could sign on. It has a list of demands. There's also a possibility to organize action, whether online or in person, targeting the US Embassy. And also there's an opportunity to tell your story, spread the word on loss and damage. If you want to join, also there'll be a link to whoever wants to write blogs or share a video or anything. So should I go on with the takeaways?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, okay. So the main takeaway will be that loss and damage refer to harms caused by climate change. It could be economic or non-economic, and or immediate or slow onset. And loss and damage could be found central to Article 8 of the Paris Agreement and is the focus of the UNFCCC Warsaw International Mechanism. At COP26, we hope to see a concrete, ambitious loss and damage actions and development of a finance window for loss and damage, commitment from developed countries, multi-year commitment to replenish the existing financial mechanism or put in place a new one. You could also help by joining the LDYC, by sharing knowledge with your community and getting involved in local loss and damage initiative or creating some loss and damage initiatives. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much, Eva, and thank you, Kerval, as well, for your presentation. I wanted to maybe start with questions, and then we can move on to some discussion before we wrap up. So, so there's a question in the chat from Adriana. Let me see. Yeah, is there a list of resources? There is a list on our website, but it's not super up to date. Yeah, I think we can find a link to send from the website, and I think that there's a few other papers that are coming out now, like one on the Santiago network on what it should look like. But yeah, cool. There's a link for the Santiago, and on the question on how to share stories, there's a form if you wanted to. I don't know, Inez, if you're able to find that form and share it, just because I'm sharing my screen right now. But there's a form to sign up to do a storytelling if you have your own story or you know someone who does. Alternatively, if you have examples of stories already kind of prepared that you want us to share, we're really happy also to like amplify the messaging of others. Cool. And do others have questions? I'm actually going to stop sharing my screen so I can see you again. There we go. Any other questions? Thanks for sharing the link, Mamadou. You can go ahead. It doesn't sound like anyone's asking questions right now. So.
Awesome. So I guess I could just speak up. So thank you everyone for putting that presentation together. That was really informative. My question is, I guess, kind of two-part. So the first part of my question is like, so there's a lot of negotiations on an international level on loss and damage, because obviously this is an international issue. But I'm wondering if you have any suggestions or feedback on what folks can do on a national level. Like I live in Canada, for example, and I think Canada has a huge responsibility to provide financial support and resourcing for, nations in the global South. And like just speaking kind of for myself here, like I don't know if I'm gonna like go to like climate negotiations and stuff like that. So I'm just wondering like if you have any suggestions or feedback on what to do when you don't have those options to go to COP, on how you can mobilize on a national scale to address these issues, especially if you're living in kind of like Western wealthy colonizer countries.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I think part of the reason we created this group is that we recognized that it wasn't enough to just go to the COP. And so like Inez and I and Ava and some others, like we came from that COP background. And we just felt it wasn't being talked about at all outside of it. And that's like why we wanted to create this organization. So I think there's a lot that can be done. In terms of in Canada, I mean, one thing you do have in Vancouver is the Environment Minister of Canada, Jonathan Wilkinson, who likes to speak at oil lobby events and tweet about Shell and their carbon offsets. But so I mean, and he actually he he likes us over at BCCIC. So if you wanted to organize a meeting with him, I mean, that would be great. And just like share that, I had a meeting with him at COP and I got 5 seconds to tell him that if they didn't provide finance for loss and damage, that developing countries would view COP 25 as a failure. And he was like, okay. But I think that if you have that time to like have a conversation with him, that kind of access is really much appreciated. I think the other thing that you can do wherever you are is bring these demands into whatever climate organizing you're already doing in your country. So for example, I would love if like the Green New Deal movement, climate justice movements, whatever, campus fossil fuel divestment movements would like talk about loss and damage, would add that as a demand to what they're doing, or would do like some special publicity on this issue, because I think that I mean our first 2 pieces of advocacy have been to target the UK and the US because we know that they like have a lot of power in this right now, and I think Canada's another one of those. Anyone else have something to add to that?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, awesome. I was going to say I agree with what you said, and also I think again what could be the most adequate thing that we can do together is like really like giving a voice, as in trying to highlight the fact that even if we some are from developed country, other developing country, we still have the same responsibility, and even if we have the same responsibility but not equal responsibility because we are coming from different background. And I think to be very useful if we kind of give like a new image of what we think will be the climate justice world, where people are brought together by this sense of urgency rather than this I don't know, this kind of inequality that we grew up in. So it would be nice because at the end of the day, we all have the same planet. And if my part is sinking, because I'm from the global south, your part will sink too, maybe not today or tomorrow, but in the near future, yours will sink too, because we are kind of in the same boat. So it would be nice to also try to picture that out, and yeah.
Other questions?
Hi, Shadi. Maybe I maybe I would like to ask about the since we are talking about the climate negotiations, and since there is an upcoming COP26 is upcoming on November, I just want to ask if there is like um an existing like group working on it. I mean, aside from LDYC, or from aside from this group, or are we the one who will be like leading this in the negotiations? Because I think it's also important to really like map out this youth organization so that we can also like work together with groups who are currently like involved, like for example the Yungo and other organizations such as like FFF or something like that. So yeah, I just want to ask if are we going to be that, or like if there is an existing. Yeah, thank you.
And Nizza, do you wanna take a shot at that?
Yeah, I can try. So definitely I don't know, but we are not the only one organization, youth organization. But if I can give like a sample of how we are structured in the NDYC is we are backed up with a group of experts who are like senior negotiators on loss and damage, working especially from least developed countries, so from the LDC. So it's like we want to create like I don't know, it's like the front of what we hope to see in the future, by giving equal voice and equal participation for every youth, by focusing especially for vulnerable or most marginalized group in the past. So yeah, and because at NYC we are not currently we are not like a registered organization, so we can't work with every organization that is existing around the world. So I think we have like around 30 or 40 organizations that are within our members, and we have roughly 200 members. So it's like we are big. So we're trying to see how we are going to like try to build that momentum in a strategic way, so that when we are going to the next COP, we'll be having like a group of young negotiators who will be fiercely standing behind their country flag, trying to raise the issue, and also trying to also have like the really group of young people also will be pressuring the negotiation outcome. So we kind of want to be like a little bit strategic. So and also because this is our first training, so like it's like we are hitting the floor running. So it's like we are figuring out what we are going to do in the near future. But I think maybe Sadie, you can add on something.
Yeah, in terms of the organizations that work on loss and damage, I would say most of them are NGOs that take the policy perspective. So they do advocacy, and we share a lot of views with them, and we've learned probably almost everything we know from them. And they mentor us, and they know about us, and they like what we're doing. But the truth is that they don't really have the level of reach in terms of social movements that we do, because our members are like embedded in Fridays for Future, in like all these different movements, because almost all of our members are members of other climate justice groups in their own countries. So essentially, we're like the first dedicated group to be trying to do this, but from a more like social movement perspective. But that being said, there are also so there is a Youngo. For those who don't know, Youngo is like the UN negotiations, like youth NGO constituencies, the people, basically youth NGOs from around the world, who come and observe the negotiations. Youngo has a working group on loss and damage, which I used to be a part of, and it's good, but they just didn't, they weren't able to like focus as intently as we are on this problem by making our own organization. And then, yeah, there are negotiators from different countries, and there are some climate justice groups that also have really strong demands on loss and damage, but we wanted to make the message go further. But a lot of those NGO partners do know about us, and hopefully we can work with them as well and amplify each other's messages. You had another question, Adriana?
Yes. So hello, this is me. But my question was also kind of following up on the stream that was just brought up. Something else that I'm also really interested in is the topic of climate change and migration. And I'm just also really curious if you know of any organizations or people who are thinking about this. And yeah, because that's also something that I really want to pursue, especially seeing how like the two hurricanes that were brought up like had thousands of people displaced and like 4,000 up to 8,000 people migrated because of it. So I'm just really curious if you know of any organizations that are working on that that I could be reaching out to as well.
Yeah, the short answer is yes. It's like very emergent, but there's like lots going on. One thing to look into is the WIM, the Warsaw International Mechanism, had a task force on displacement, which was, they brought together like a bunch of research organizations essentially to like investigate this issue, and they wrote a report, I think. So on the research side, Adriana, we're gonna talk next week, and I think maybe I can give you a fuller list at that time. But yeah, a lot of the NGO partners that we work with as well are also starting to put out reports on this, starting to put out knowledge products on this. And I think this is something that I think there is sufficient interest within our membership that we can start doing stuff on this. It's a little bit hard because we're also very early days and just running our first things, but eventually I would love if we can be a home for that kind of advocacy, action, research, etc. Yeah, Ineza, did you want to add to that?
Basically, you said everything I wanted to say, but I think yeah, I think if it would be okay, maybe we can try to see what we are having currently, because I was thinking like maybe it would be very useful to kind of link to what the research is being taken in, I think, Senegal, Bangladesh, and Kiribati. I know some countries, I don't know how to spell their name. They want to they want to look on how loss and damage is impacting their community. And one of the key challenges is immigration, and especially from the global south. Okay, so I think yeah, maybe we can try to see what we can bring it up, and maybe we can just try to send you an email with like a bunch of maybe new links or new ideas, or yeah.
Yeah, note to future self. I think we could start having a running list of these resources.
Yeah,
because they exist like in a cloud in my head right now. They could exist in a Google folder on the real cloud.
yeah.
Cool. Do we want to briefly like just do a little bit of discussion, like I don't know if this like we do have a little bit of time to kind of go into breakout groups. The question, we don't have to though. We could also just stay in this main room because there's not so many of us. Yeah, the focus, yeah, the question we had like was how does loss and damage affect your home or the place that you live, and what action do you think we should take to address loss and damage? So yeah, I don't know if anybody wants to share around that. Obviously you don't have to, but
maybe I can briefly share what we are going through here in the Philippines because I would like to thank Sadi for connecting to me because when I talked last year in the event that we have right here in the group, I was enlightened by the concept. I mean, I've heard the concept of loss and damage, but the when I was invited in that event, I thoroughly researched about the concept and how it's really important to be connected in the fight against or in fight to accomplish the our collective goal, which is the climate justice for countries, especially those who are most devastated. But for me, I would like to say that it's not really that it's not really I mean people is not really aware with the concept. I mean just like the climate justice word, they're not aware of this. It's like they just accepted that they will be affected by the people who will be affected by the storms or catastrophes. They will just after the typhoon they will just accept that they have lost these things, they have lost their crops, they have lost their homes, they have lost their loved ones or anything that they have like the materials that they have. And for them to go on to move forward, they have to work hard again just to provide the needs that they have because it was lost from the typhoon. So like reading articles and stories about loss and damage, it's really like um heartbreaking moment for me because it shouldn't be like that. Like people should know that they deserve more, especially the communities who are frequently experiencing this catastrophes strengthened by the climate crisis, right? So for me, it's really important to really contextualize it in the language of people, in the manner that they will understand that it's not just about having or experiencing typhoons, experiencing catastrophes, or experiencing the climate impacts, but the damage and the loss that these things are um, influencing or affecting their lives because it's not really that fair. You know, I mean, um, while people in the, I mean, sorry for those who are coming from the global north, but yeah, I mean, it's really unfair that countries from the global north are wealthy, they're living a good life. I mean, there are rich countries. The government can like support their people. I mean, not everyone, but as you can see, you can see that the roads are the if the roads are being destroyed by catastrophes, it will be fixed in just 3 days, in just 1 week. But here in the global south, it will take a year, it will take months, it will take a long time to rebuild our our infrastructures, which is not good because it affects the economy, the people, their jobs and such. So I think it's really like connected to everything that we do. I mean, it should be like while we are working for the things that we are currently working right now, it should be like mainstream also because in the Philippines, well, aside from me, there is no organization, I think, at least for me, that is working thoroughly for this. And I think it's a really good thing to really share this to people. That is why I'm very thankful that I'm I'm having this conversation with everyone. And yeah, and I'm also thankful that we are not we are really diverse here, and we are really, sharing stories from our countries, which we experience personally. Yeah, sorry, I talk too much. Thank you.
No, it's all good. Yeah, really appreciate it, and really appreciate you bringing this up. I think, yeah, I also appreciate that we're a really diverse group of people. Like, really, truly, everyone has these like stories, and yeah, it's really great to connect. Do other people want to share about kind of, I don't know, anything you have kind of observed around loss and damage in your area, or also ideas for action? Yeah, anyone else want to share? Yes, Ashta.
Yeah, so this has been awesome. So first, I just want to say thank you all for your labor. You put a lot of work into this, so I really appreciate that. And all of this capacity building is great. So something that we're working on. So even though we're writing from the BCCIC, I just want to let everybody know that the people writing on it, we're all volunteers. So I think we occupy like a really great middle section there between policy as well as social justice and activism. So something that we're really pushing in Canada is trying to get loss and damage recognized in INDCs. So most countries that have it right now are the ones that disproportionately feel the impacts of what's happening. So we really want Canada to do this because it's going to reaffirm their position, to say that, hey, listen, we are a global country here that's committed to doing these things. So that's one great way to hold them accountable. And even though it's a small step, it's a big one for loss and damage to really get that into the public discourse. Another thing we're working on is trying to operationalize this on the national scale. So our paper that we're working on is currently putting some recommendations to the Canadian government. And we're using the case of Bangladesh because they've done a really great job of being able to implement sort of national infrastructure that's been used in disaster risk management and things like that, as well as some insurance that it's a little bit better the way that they're doing it, in the sense that it's pulling money from people that have the resources to support the people that need the resources. So it's not perfect, but it is a far more equitable kind of solution that I've seen compared to other places. So I think Bangladesh has done a lot of really great work, and it can be a really great place to see how they've done it, as well as in the Caribbean. They've created so many groups that are supporting one another through the community. And I think those areas, when we look at those cases, provide a great way for us to operationalize the language from WIM into something that's practical and tangible and that we can actually see. And a lot of the solutions put forth aren't things that are going to, show us solutions in 10 or 20 years. They're also immediate. And I think that's going to be important in order to get public mobilization behind it, so that people can kind of see, unfortunately, capitalism has really taught us that if we don't see immediate results, they're not coming. So it really balances that. So I think that's a really great way forward too, is to look at some other regional contexts and see how they've operationalized it to put it into context in your own country.
Totally. I think, well, first, that's great. Thank you for the work you're doing on the NDCs and loss and damage. Yeah, I think one of the great things about like some of the people in our network is that we actually do know some of the real experts on loss of damage, and eventually I'd really like to bring them in to come and talk to everyone at LDYC and like do some panels and stuff, because they're really actually excited about what we're doing, because they've been working on this issue there, well, at least for the past decade or so, if not more, and they feel sometimes like they're banging their head against a wall, and in other ways they're making progress. So I think they're really excited to see what we're doing. And yeah, like for example, like one of the experts from Bangladesh, Salim, knows about us, and I think he would be happy to come to speak to us at some point. Yeah, great. But that's awesome. Yeah, I think getting it into NDCs, for those who don't know, are the nationally determined contributions, which are essentially country pledges for loss and damage. I heard you guys are consulting on the Philippines NDC, but they're not letting you really do things consulting. Thank you, Asha. Is there anyone else who'd like to share? I don't know, Carvel, do you know of any examples in the Caribbean um, about loss and damage and like some of the disaster response programs and stuff that have gone on there?
Well, for us, definitely cases like the Bahamas and Dominica of prominence. With terms of dealing with loss and damage, it's just the typical means which we've already addressed, like humanitarian aid and perhaps projects, but no formal mechanism.
I remember meeting someone from the Bahamas um, uh, in 2019, like after they had a really big hurricane there, which was like extremely destructive to their economy. And they were saying that they had an insurance scheme actually, and then but the insurance scheme didn't actually cover like the island that ended up being hit the hardest because it only covered part of it. And then like they're having this issue where the insurers like don't aren't willing to insure the most risky areas, and even if they are, like the the premiums for the insurance can be more expensive than they can afford because the risk is just so high. So like that's a and then there's the debate over whether like insurance, public finance versus like private insurance, but yeah, that was an interesting example there. Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's pretty devastating, some of these examples, and I think they're like increasingly common. So we're kind of at time now. But yeah, a team meeting next steps. Yeah, so we have and you might have, I hope you received this. We have like working groups that meet every 2 weeks. We have 4 working groups, which are advocacy, um, communication, storytelling, and training, which is the one that created this group. And then every so often we'll host like an LDYC wide meeting, which is a good option if you don't have the time to commit to a working group. And yeah, the next steps, I mean, some of the links in the chat for our Global Day of Action, and our storytelling, would be great. And otherwise, we're always available on the Slack chat, and by email. And yeah, all our working group are operating on Slack. Yeah. And yeah, I don't know if everyone just wants to like put a reflection into the chat, and then we'll wrap it up. Just a reflection on how you're feeling or what you learned, or a brief piece of feedback would be really great to see. Awesome. Thank you, everyone. Happy Saturday, happy weekend, and good luck, solidarity with all your climate organizing, and happy Saturday, everyone.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Bye. Thank you for your time.
Bye.
Bye.